Craig Curelop, we got you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming on Military Cashflow, sharing some value with us. Would you mind please telling our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you're doing?
For sure, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess to start, my name is Craig Curelop. I'm located in the greater Denver area. My whole journey started with an obsession over achieving financial independence at an early age. So I pretty much did everything that I could to get there. I started off with a house hack back in 2017, and now I am 5 house hacks in. Got a bunch of other rental properties as well, actually out in North Carolina where Mike is at. And some other stuff as well. And, so I've been financially independent now for a couple of years. Once I've hit that financial independence mark, that's when I decided to take a little bit of a risk because I felt like I could take a risk, right? Like when you're financially independent, I no longer need a paycheck to survive. So I went out and started my own real estate team to help other people kind of achieve the same goals that I have through, we coach, guide, and mentor people through house hacking. And that's what the Phi Team is.
Dude, that's awesome, man. I love just the quick summary of your story. Now let's get into the details, man, because I know that people want to know. One, let's start off with where did your journey with money and what was your introduction into Phi, right? And then I'll get into we would love to know like your definition of Phi and what that means for any of the audience that's unfamiliar with that. So I know that was like a 5-part question, but
for sure. No, I'm used to answering those, it's like the history books back in the day. So I first learned about financial independence back in 2016 is when I first discovered it. I was reading Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, and he talks about thinking about your income and your expenses on a monthly basis versus an annual basis, which when people ask you how much money you make, you say, $70,000 a year, right? You never say $5,000 a month, right? And so that was just more digestible. And once he said that, hey, once your passive income exceeds your expenses, you no longer are required to work, right? And now anyone who's going to achieve financial independence at a young age is likely not going to just stop working, right? Like there's a certain fire, a certain drive, and a certain set of discipline that you need to scratch and itch and exercise when you achieve financial independence at a young age. And so, back in 2016, I read that book. I was in Silicon Valley at the time, working in the venture capital world. So the path to financial independence was building a business, right? An entrepreneurial venture. And I had like 4 or 5 really, really cruddy ideas. And after realizing that, man, I don't need to be like a billionaire, right? I can just own a handful of rental properties, and 90% of the world's millionaires own real estate. So, hey, like just do what's tried and true, right? So that's when I found Bigger Pockets. And I just started getting absorbed into Bigger Pockets. I was watching their webinars, listening to their podcasts, reading their books, like just being obsessed with Bigger Pockets. And in 2017, I actually got a job at Bigger Pockets, right? So after 6 months of listening to them and basically like living Bigger Pockets, I got a job there. And that's when kind of my life hit a pretty big inflection point. That was when I could actually hang out with some of the big dogs and have a little bit of credibility. And that's when I got my first house hack.
Dude, that's awesome. That's such a great story, man. Like how did you, all right. So you got introduced to Phi and understanding through Tim Ferriss's book. And then you were already working in the venture capital space. And I know there's typically a lot of money to be made, especially if you're talking about the Silicon Valley, right? So, and then from there going to Bigger Pockets, how did that transition work? Because it seems like you had a light bulb switch, right? And then you're like, I'm assuming you had a higher income in Silicon Valley than you did when you switched over to work for Bigger Pockets. Because if it was in 2017, they were pretty big, but they weren't like, Bigger Pockets now, right? So how was that? Can you talk us through that and what that looked like for you?
Yeah. So back in Silicon Valley, I was making over $100,000 a year, like all in, if you include like the 401k max and everything, probably about $115,000 a year, which is a phenomenal salary for a 22-year-old right out of college, right? I think most people would take that, but I was miserable. I was working, at least 60 hours a week, many weeks closer to 80 to 100. And so if you do the dollar per hour value, I'm actually not making that much, right? And so, I just really the straw that broke the camel's back was when I was with my girlfriend at the time in Big Sur, and we had a beautiful weekend. It was amazing, but there's no service down there. So I get an email on my phone Sunday night when I get back that I have to finish up this memo by 8 a.m. Eastern time, which was 5 a.m. Pacific. So that whole Sunday night, I was freaking doing this memo. And she was upset and I was upset. And I'm like, man, like if this is like a preview of the rest of my life, if I continue in this field and grow, then I don't want it. Like unsubscribe, like I don't want this lifestyle. And so that's really like the tipping point that got me into thinking about, okay, how do I get out? And that was Tim Ferriss's book. That transition from applying to Bigger Pockets, I did this like trip in South America and I like found myself and did all that, fun stuff. And that was when I was like, all right, like when I get back, I am hardcore applying to jobs. So I applied to 250 jobs in one weekend. 249 were actually in Florida and one was in Colorado, which is where Bigger Pockets is. And so obviously I could not pass up a Bigger Pockets opportunity. And so when I talked to Scott, who at the time is now the CEO of Bigger Pockets, but at the time was the operations manager and he was in charge of hiring me, he basically told me like, you will make less money this year. Like I made, so I went from making $115,000 to $65,000 when I started at Bigger Pockets. But however, like he's like, I think you're going to get a lot more opportunity here where you have, a pathway to make a lot more. And I'm like, all right. I mean, that's fair. Like I could totally see that. So I went ahead, I took a huge pay cut, right? 115 to 65,000. That's almost half my salary, to start working at Bigger Pockets. And not only was I working only like 40 hours a week. Actually, I put in extra time, but I was only required to work 40 hours a week. But I actually enjoyed what I was doing. And I felt like I was actually helping people and I felt like I was, changing people's lives. And then, yeah, I mean, that I guess like was the big transition.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. Like, so went to you say you went to South America and found yourself, right?
Yeah. I'll let you guys infer as to what that means.
You.
Yeah.
I got you, man. But yeah, so you went there and you snuck out, you found that opportunity and you started going from there. So from there, I'm assuming that helped you get into your first house hack, right? Now when you're involved, are you're I guess kind of networking and talking with people like Scott Trench and the whole Bigger Pockets team, because obviously everyone there is real estate oriented, right? Why the house hack and not like, something else? I mean, I'm just curious.
For sure. Yeah. So I think most people think like working at Bigger Pockets, like everyone just talks about real estate all day and they're just like masterminding and stuff. It's actually not the case. Like they're growing a tech business. And so there was real estate talk, but not as much, like more than a traditional job, but not like as much as everyone thinks.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went the house hacking route because again, at the time I was 24 years old and I didn't have a whole lot of money, right? I maybe had 30, 40, $50,000, which is a lot of money to some people, but like that's enough in Denver for a low percent down payment. So I could really only afford 3 to 5% down. So that's what I did, right? I bought a property for 3 to 5% down. I used about, 20,000 of what I had saved up to purchase this house. And the magic of house hacking is that you can purchase it with such a little bit of money. And that's where your cash on cash return comes from, right?
Leverage.
I mean, yeah, exactly right. So I put $20,000 down. I mean, and I probably cash flowed, $12,000 in that first year. That's like a 60% cash on cash return. Not to mention the appreciation in the taxes, the tax savings, and the loan pay down. You're talking of a return of well over 100% every single time when you do a house hack. So yeah, for a beginner, it's like there's no other strategy that I think makes more sense.
Exactly. Excellent. Yeah, I love the house hack method. Now, when you did do the house hack, right? I'm assuming it was you and your girlfriend. Did you guys do a single family? Did you do a duplex, or like what did that look like for you?
So yeah, my first house hack was a duplex because at the time no one really knew about rent by the room. Like the only way to house hack was a duplex.
Yeah, Airbnb wasn't really like a thing. It wasn't like as mainstream as it is right now, right?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was definitely around, but it wasn't popping. And so it was. So I lived in the downstairs, rented out the upstairs, and so my mortgage payment on that first property was like $2,000. And I was only making $1,750 from the upstairs. So I wasn't quite covering. And I really, really, really wanted to cover. So I actually Airbnb'd out my bedroom and I slept in the living room, like behind a curtain in a like a cardboard box or whatever. And I made $1,100 a month off of my bedroom.
Love it.
So
Love it.
yeah.
So what I want to really emphasize there, right, is the power of house hacking, right? We have most of our audience are service members, right? And we try to really preach using that VA loan with 0% down, similar to I'm assuming you use an FHA loan, right?
Yeah.
The same exact concept, but you put 0% down. So it's even more of a cash on cash. It's literally 100% cash on cash return pretty much immediately. But preaching the same exact thing, buying a duplex and living on one side and then cash flowing off the other side. And then we even get paid what's called basic housing allowance or basic allowance for housing, BAH, for finding a place to live off post, right? So we get to reduce our living expenses by renting out the other side. And then also we get paid and get to keep our BAH, which is an awesome thing. So what did that look like for you, or how much did that change your financial position once you started house hacking? You no longer had to pay for what most people would say is their most expensive monthly expense, right? What did that look
for
like
sure.
for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was living pretty cheap before. I think I was living for $600 a month in a room. Yeah.
In
Like
Colorado.
yeah, I got a steal, right? Like you couldn't find that. Honestly, it was such a steal. But really, that actually my real living expense was probably about $1,000 a month. Like if I were to actually if I didn't find this fluke deal. And so let's just say $1,000 a month. Plus I went from spending what would probably be about $1,000 a month to making $600 a month and living for free. Right. So that's a $1,600 difference. And so, I mean, that's obviously significant, right? That's like almost 20 grand a year. And so that right there is your savings for your next house hack, right? I mean, that's how you build it. That's how you grow it.
Exactly. It's kind of like a compounding interest a little bit, right? Like
for sure.
The way the money grows. That's awesome. So you just parlay that into a few more house hacks, right? And then, so did you wait the 1 year? Because that's another thing that a lot of people are asking questions about. What did that look like for you? The space in between the first one and then the second one, third, fourth, and fifth. Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I call that the lull period. And it happens a lot. Like if you're still working at W-2 and you just got your first one and it's all settled, especially if it's more turnkey. Because yeah, I had that thing rented in a month and the Airbnb was set up in a month. And I was like, shoot, I got like 10 more months so I can buy my next one. Like, what do I do now? And so basically what I did was I worked really hard at my job to make sure that I got my bonus at the end of the year. I asked my employer at Bigger Pockets, I asked Scott, I said, hey, is there any projects that I can do that's outside of my current like job description, outside of my current scope of work that would make the company money that I could potentially get like a bonus for, right? Like a spot bonus. And he thought about it and he was like, yeah, you can create landlord forms for all 50 states and we'll pay you $500 per state. And I was like, okay. So I went in and I literally, like the landlord forms are still a Bigger Pocket site. I created all those and created all of those with, contacted a lawyer in all 50 states and we got the landlord forms reviewed and looked at. And then I got 25 grand from it.
Dude,
right?
Talk about adding value, dude. That is awesome, man. That's a great way to think outside of the box, man. How can you add value to your organization in return that brings something to you? And I'm sure you learned a lot through that process as well, right? How many attorneys did you talk to, different attorneys throughout different states? And you eventually invested in, I'm curious, I know you eventually invested in North Carolina with your couple of rental properties. Did you use any of those attorneys that you talked to, or did you continue to use them?
No, I didn't actually use them. Yeah. Sorry, it's not the love story that you wanted.
That's all good.
I just honestly, I found Mike and the 5 Pillars team, and I was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna use whoever you guys use because you got your shit dialed. So
Mike's a monster, and Shelby, the whole 5 Pillars team. Shout out to them, man. They're freaking awesome, dude.
Love those guys.
Excellent. Okay, so you did the parlay, you did you waited 12 months, and then you did another house hack. You had that lull period that you talked about, and I think that's like the most important time, really. That's like very little. It's not talked about often, right? Like how important that time is, because you kind of really get to sit and reflect on what you're doing, and then also strategize your next move, right? Which is extremely important for how you're mapping this thing out, right? So
yeah. So, I mean, I guess like I can explain a little bit more about what I did in that lull time too, because that wasn't the only thing, right? That was just my job at Bigger Pockets, right? But I also had time outside of Bigger Pockets because, like I said, I was like aggressive as all hell, and so I also rented my car out on Turo, which is like the Airbnb. I'm sure people know Turo by now, but if you don't know, it's like the Airbnb for cars. People can just come and rent your car. I was biking and walking distance from work, and biking and walking distance from grocery stores and all that. So I would pretty much just bike everywhere. And I was also doing Airbnb arbitrage with a buddy. So I was paying my buddy, I forget the amount, like maybe $2,000 a month to rent his downtown condo, and I would put it up on Airbnb and probably make 3 or 4 grand a month from it.
Nice. So you're just being creative, man. You're using those creative juices, and just going with everything, dude. You talked about Airbnb, we talked about house hacking, we talked about freaking Turo, all in like this lull period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talking about math and forgot about the all 50 states. Like I know someone listening has been on Bigger Pockets and used those landlord forms, right? So we're just using those creative juices as however you can, to add value and continue to build wealth. That's great, man. I think everyone listening can definitely take note of that, run that piece and take note of that, and kind of think about how you can add value to whatever organization that you're in, or how can you use some of the things you have to generate more income, right? Like we talked about that spare car, Turo, or if you can walk to work, or whatever you can do in your situation. That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, it's just like how can you turn your, like Robert Kiyosaki calls, assets are things that put money in your pocket, liabilities are what takes money out of your pocket. So how can you turn your liabilities into assets, right? So that's what I did with my car, and that was pretty much probably the only thing that was consistently taking money out of my pocket. But that was kind of my mindset.
Great. So let's talk Phi, man. Like, so we haven't actually had anyone on the show like specifically talk to Phi. We know you got a podcast. It's the Phi Team, right? It's a great podcast. Can you explain a little bit about what Phi means, and then what the definition of Phi is, why it's important, and like why other people should kind of pursue that?
Yeah. So financial independence is the idea that you can support your lifestyle through your investments, through your passive income. So to some people, that's stock dividends. To some people, that's just like selling off their stock portfolio slowly. To some people, that's rental income, right? I think rental income is the fastest way to get there. So that's the way that I pursued, right? And so once you're like, there's kind of different tiers of financial independence or Phi. There's base Phi, which is like, okay, your basic needs are covered, right? So think $3,000 to $5,000 a month for most people is base financial independence. Then there's kind of like comfortable Phi, right? Where it's like you're living a middle-class lifestyle, probably $100,000 to $100,000 a year spending, right? And so that is base level Phi. And then there's what's called fat fire. Fat fire is like you can basically spend kind of whatever you want. You really don't have to really worry about money anymore, right? And that's probably, again, that's different for different people, but for us, that's probably like $250,000 to $500,000 a year of passive income.
What about barista fire, man?
What's barista fire? I forget about that.
They said barista fire is when you have enough income to quit whatever job you don't want, right? And you just need a little bit to supplement, meaning you can go be a barista, right? Like you only need
health insurance.
So, yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way to do it. So for us, it would be called, like, I guess, reservist fire, right? Like you just go be a reservist, get your health care, a little bit of income, and still be good to go. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
That's an excellent breakdown, man. So what does that mean for you? What does Phi mean for you?
So Phi, the reason why I was so adamant about achieving Phi is that I think until you're financially independent, you are just living your life playing not to lose, right? You're going to work every day. And if you don't go to work every day, like your life is in your boss's hands. If he fires you, what are you going to do? Right. And so that's really no way to live, right? A pandemic hits, a crash happens, you get laid off. Like, what do you do? What do you do to your family? And so I just think, like, one, there's a feeling of safety there. And it's like, if it's men listening to this podcast or women, like your job is to supply for your family. And if you lose your job and you can't supply for your family, like, you're not being the man that you were born to be. Right. And so that's a big piece of it for me. Secondly is once you can stop playing not to lose and you achieve financial independence, at least base level financial independence, you can then go out and be an entrepreneur. Right. And you can go take bigger risks that other people can't take because they can't they can't lose, right? They can't spend 10,000, they can't risk $10,000 and lose it and not, again, still be able to like survive. Whereas like when you're based financial independent and you have maybe a little bit of a nest egg, all right, I'm going to go try this $10,000 venture. I'm going to go spend $10,000 to open up a new business. And that $10,000 could then turn into $1 million in a year or two. Right. And that's like kind of what I did, right? Like my net worth and my earnings exploded once I quit my W-2 job. And you'll see it. Like you can go look up like what are the highest paying jobs. You're going to see it. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, all this stuff. But like the top level is entrepreneur because it's infinite. Right.
I think that's crucial because you're 100% right, man. Like if you're just barely getting by, you can't afford to take any risks because any risk means like loss of livelihood, right? So as soon as you get beyond that and actually have a little bit of money to then invest into something like an entrepreneurial journey, then your net worth can explode. Like you can definitely put more into doing other things, like generating more income, right? What did that look like for you? Because obviously we know that you started a realty firm, right? Or you started a realty team. What did that look like for you? And what did that risk look like for you?
For sure. Yeah. So I achieved financial independence. I think I officially hit it in 2019. And I tested that by basically maxing out my 401k by taking a $0 paycheck for 3 months. And so I just put all my money into my 401k and I figured, hey, at the end of these 3 months, if my checking account is larger, I'm financially free. If not, well, I just maxed out my 401k and I'm almost financially free, right? Because I knew I was almost there. And so after those 3 months, when I realized my checking account was larger, I was like, damn, I'm financially free. Right. And so at that point, I was starting to take on real estate clients by myself and I was making, 20 grand a month doing real estate transactions. And that was just 2 people a month. Whereas, so, quick math, that's about $240,000 a year, where I was making $86,000 a year at Bigger Pockets at the time. And so like no brainer, right? I'm literally making 3 times more doing this part-time thing. What if I did it full-time? So it was like a risk, but it really wasn't that big of a risk because I was like, man, even if I like don't do any more transactions, I'm still better off. And I just freed up 40 hours of my week. All right. Well, turns out that I ended up doing a lot more transactions that year. And so this is 2020 now is when I quit. I ended up doing almost 100 transactions that year. And I was about at the level of burnout. I was like, dude, I just like can't do this anymore. Like I either have to quit and I could, right? I mean, I had probably like $1 million. Like I was like, I could quit. I could go travel the world. I could totally live like a lean Phi lifestyle and be pretty frugal. Or I could, well, actually I couldn't travel the world because COVID happened, but, or I could like double down, right? I could start building a real estate team. And I have all these clients, 100 clients or so that I worked with that are super passionate about real estate. They want to help other people and many of them get their license. And so now we've got like 20 agents on our team, all of whom have house hacked before. They coach, guide, and mentor, the next generation of house hackers. And they're like given that handhold so that, people can feel comfortable with the biggest decision of their lives. And that has really taken off. That's been, we've been doing this for over almost a year now. And it's been going good. We love it.
Excellent, man. What's been the challenges, man? What are some of the key takeaways?
In the team building or in what aspect?
Both. So like we talked about the house hacking and then also the team building. Just mainly I'm curious about just taking that leap of into entrepreneurship, right? But what are the lessons learned for you? And let's just stick with that, with the jumping into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So one of the biggest lessons that I learned was, and I'm still learning it, is that when you first start out, you're like pretty cheap, right? Like you're doing everything yourself. You're building your own website, you're answering your emails, doing the calendar, like you check every single box. And so because you can do it yourself, you think that you should do it yourself. And it actually limits you, right? Because you're not staying in your zone of genius. And so as I became more and more entrepreneurial, I was like, okay, like I really shouldn't be doing this, showing the houses and running the contracts anymore. I'm working with too many people. I am no longer the best person to do that job. So I hired my agents, I trained them, and now they are infinitely better than me, right? And so that is one thing that I let go, right? I hired a bookkeeper, I hired a marketing person, hired social media, you hired an assistant. And so now my zone of genius in my opinion is like content creation, right? So coming on podcasts like this, we have our own podcast, doing TikToks and Instagrams and making videos and all that kind of stuff. Like that's where the zone of genius is. And that's, I think, my biggest money making activities. And don't get me wrong, like I'm still building systems for the team, right? We're trying to make the team run smoothly while also growing it. And so that's kind of where I am at.
Taking yourself out of the business, basically building the
Yeah.
system to operate by itself by taking yourself out of the business, and this kind of looking at that 1,000-foot level or that 2,000-foot level and kind of moving pieces from there.
That's right.
Excellent. Okay. So we talked about financial independence. We talked about building your team, and then what we haven't talked about the Phi Team, the actual podcast, right? So I'm curious, where did that come in? Where did that come into play?
Sorry. Yeah, you can redo that.
That's good. So we talked about the Phi Team. We talked about the real estate. We talked about jumping into entrepreneurship, right, and building the real estate team. What about the Phi Team podcast, right? Where did that come into play, and how does that factor into everything that you've created, so far?
Yeah, so the Phi Team podcast has actually gone through kind of an evolution. It started off as kind of just a lead generation source for our real estate team. It was me and another agent, and we were just talking real estate. However, it's kind of transitioned into, he ended up, it ended up not working out with my first partner now we got another partner who's amazing. Her name is Ziana McIntyre. You may have heard of her. And so we are now just like, kind of just like this one, right? We just want to hear people's journeys through financial independence, because everyone's got a different journey and everyone's at a different spot on their journey, right? And so someone may have done it through real estate, someone may have done it through stocks. We tend to talk mostly about real estate, but some people have 100 units and some people have one, right? And so it's just like, where are you in your journey? How did you get there? And everyone's journey is different, and hopefully you can just like take some ideas from them. And yeah, we're actually transitioning the podcast and rebranding it. So by the time this airs, it actually may be called Investify. That's the new name. So yeah, definitely come check it out.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I love what you're doing there, because I listened to the Mindy Kaling episode, and if you guys don't know, she's part of Bigger Pockets. She runs the Money Show podcast, which I listened to that as well. So it's pretty interesting. She never really talks a lot about herself, so when you kind of break down her journey, it's pretty cool to see a different side of someone, right? Which I'm sure like someone listening to this would be like, oh man, I didn't know that about Craig. I listened to the Phi Team or the Investify, right? And Investify, and I didn't know that this was his actual journey, right? So I really like that. We talked about the transition into the podcast and how you first started it, and it was really just a lead generation thing, and it's morphed into something bigger, right? It's morphed into something bigger, and all those stories, all these interviews that you're having, they're from people with different walks of life, and different parts of their investing journey. One thing I really like about it is because, I mean, all of them are pretty much relatable, right? You can relate to a certain part of someone's journey regardless of who it is. That's one thing I love about bringing other people on, because there's something here, there's somebody listening that can really relate to your stories. Like, man, I was there too. Oh man, I'm at that point. And just like you talked about, giving specific ideas, man. That's one thing I love about podcasts myself, just meeting some pretty cool people. It's always good times, man.
Oh yeah, love that. I love that too.
Yeah, so I got one question for you. One thing I meant to ask back when we were talking about you getting to financial freedom, did you go back and like reverse engineer what financial freedom looked like for you before you actually started on that journey, or were you just kind of going and was like, hey man, this is financial freedom for me. I know this is it right here because I'm living off of my investments, basically.
Yeah, I mean, my like initial number was 3,000 a month, and then you got there and you're like, well, it's kind of cutting it close. So then it like increases to 5,000. And then you're like, okay, like 5,000 works, but like, well, 10,000 would be nice, right? Like the goalpost keeps moving.
Tell us how to reverse engineer that. How do we, if someone's listening, actionable steps, right? And I want to get to 5. Yeah. What do I do to reverse engineer? Let's say if I'm using real estate, and then let's say if I'm using stocks.
Okay. Yeah. So a good way to reverse engineer it is if you're not let's assume you don't do anything with your finances, you're just spending money, right? So I'm hoping that you don't use like cash too often to spend money. And so what you can do is just download your credit card statement for like the last 12 months, sum up the total, and that's your annual expenses for the year. Divide that and make sure you do that for your checking account, and basically take all your bank accounts, get all the information, make sure you remove all of the income sources and just only have the expense sources. Add them up, divide them by 12. That's your monthly target, right? That's what your monthly target is. And so let's say it's $4,000. And so then you're like, okay, how many properties is it going to take me to get $4,000 in passive income? And so if it's $500 a property, it's going to take you 8 properties to get to $4,000, right? That's one way. The second way is what's called the 4% rule, the 4% rule.
25%, 4%.
25, yeah, 20
or 25. It says 25x or 4%, but either way, same thing.
Yeah, same thing. 25x 4% rule. And so what that says is that basically like you should have X number. Like let's say, so if your spending is, if your spending is $4,000 a month, let's just say it's $40,000 a year for ease of math. So your spending is $40,000 a year. And so if you multiply that 40,000 times 25, right, you're going to get $1 million. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And so basically what it says is you need to have $1 million in your stock portfolio to spend $4,000 a month and have a highly likelihood of not running out of money, right? They did this thing called the Trinity Study back in the late 90s, I think. And what that is they took, lots of people's accounts, and they looked at it over the course of 30 years. And they said, if you had, if you spent 4% of your entire nest egg in that account, there's a 95% chance that you won't run out of money. Right. And so those are pretty good odds to take. Obviously, there's a 5% chance that you could. And obviously, that was over a 30-year period, right? Over a 60-year period, it may be a little bit more risky, right? So you may want to scale that back maybe to a 3%, right? So there's different rules for different people. But I think the 4% rule is, again, good enough.
Excellent explanation. So I particularly like the reverse engineering strategy. I've discussed that several times as like the first step to FI, right? Like finding out what you actually spend and then set your target, right? Because you need those goals sometimes to like really put you on the right trajectory. If you don't know where you're going, you're just kind of going, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
I absolutely love it. And using those property references like, hey, for the most part, single family homes probably going to cash flow anywhere between $300, $400, depending on your area. Obviously that changes, but if you hit that benchmark and you just do that reverse engineering based off of how much you're spending per month, you can easily find out how many properties you need to then support your desired lifestyle, right? And exactly. love the Trinity Study as well. So if you guys aren't familiar with it, definitely go look that up because it's some great information, and it might really change the way that you think about what you need to invest. You might think you might look at what you have in your stock portfolio, because I know there's a lot of people out there that TSPers and 401kers, and they're not doing real estate at all. They're only focused on like stocks and things like that. So you might look at your portfolio and determine like, man, based off this, I probably need to kind of hike it up a notch, or based off this, maybe I can slow it down and start to invest in some other things. So that's great. So dude, I absolutely love your story, man. Like from the beginning to the end, it's just all perseverance and like using those creative juices to get things going, man. Like I love it, dude.
Hell yeah, dude.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah.
So got a question for you. So any of our listeners out there, right? If you had one piece of advice to give them that would help them kind of get to their FI journey, right? Or get to, start their FI journey, or like get them on the right trajectory, what would that one piece of advice be?
I would just say, don't be afraid to get started, because getting started is the hardest part. Like the mistakes you make are actually way easier than getting started, because you can figure out your mistakes. And once you've made the mistake, you need to figure it out, right? Like you put yourself in a position, like put yourself in those, like you can't turn back situations, and you will be very grateful that you did.
Yeah, man. Burn the boat site.
Yeah, right. Jump off and burn the boat or burn the bridge or whatever.
Yeah, got you, man. Definitely. how can our listeners get in contact with you?
So I mean, we've got our own podcast. Again, depending on when this comes out, you can search it for the Phi Team Podcast, or it'll be called Invest to Phi, like invest the number 2 Phi. And you can hit me up on Instagram. I'm at the FiGuy on Instagram. And I mean, those are probably the best 2 places to hit me up.
Yeah, man, it's been awesome, man. Like, love talking with you. You dropped a lot of nuggets. I know there's some really relatable, some people that are going to find this show extremely relatable, and find some things that they can incorporate into whatever their ventures are, whether it be real estate or just getting to Phi in general, man. I think it's really important. I just really appreciate you coming on the show, man, spending some time with us.
Appreciate you, dude. Yeah, I appreciate you having me, man. It's been a lot of fun. I always love talking about this stuff. So
yeah, man. Well, with that, this is Dan Wynn signing off.